and has just done a masterful job covering the changing landscape in college football. And here we are yet again. Ross, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I don't know where to begin because there's so much, so I'll start with this. How many people do you know in your personal life that have asked you what's going to happen next? Like, hey, what's the SEC going to do? Or, hey, what's the Pac-12 going to do? What's the Big 12 going to do? How many texts have you gotten over the last few days?
Well, thankfully, I'm back from vacation with my family, who certainly all wanted to know that during vacation, so that was fun. So at least I'm been removed from that, and I've been bunkered in my office here in D.C. at my home. So not as much of that as you'd expect, but I think everybody certainly is wondering that question. I just think a lot of people, or very few people, if any, know the answer to that question. And so you can ask it all you want, right? But I don't know that there are very many answers.
So let's start with local interest here in SEC country. Do you find that they're eager to expand, or do you think that this decision from USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, has that really changed the SEC's plans or trajectory at all?
I don't believe so. I think the SEC certainly is monitoring everything going on with the movement in college sports, but I don't get a sense that they are rattled at all or going to spring into action. Now, maybe that changes if the Big Ten adds any more teams. Per se, if the Big Ten would add Notre Dame and then another team to get to 18, then does the SEC do something? I don't know. Still, maybe not. But certainly right now, I don't think there's any panic or any plans to make any kind of decisions on expanding again. And you got to remember one important detail that's often forgotten or misunderstood by fans, and that's you don't just add teams to add teams. It's about quality these days, not as much about quantity. So, what drives expansion is money, and the money comes from TV revenue and TV deals, media rights deals, as they're often described. So if you add a team or add two teams, say like the Big Ten went from 14 to 16, those two teams better bring enough value to increase significantly the overall TV rights deal of the contract, so that when you split the pie up by 16, an extra two teams, that you get more. You get more annual distribution than you had previously. And that's hard. How many teams, how many schools are out there right now that are not a part of the Big Ten or SEC? How many schools are out there that can add value to those two conferences enough to join those conferences? That list is very short. It's probably four teams maybe. And many of them are stuck in the ACC, which has a deal that runs through 2036 that kind of locks them in.
Ross, so are we seeing the end of the Pac-12 here? Is this conference going to be able to survive the next 2-3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that there's a lot of reports out there about the Big Ten being aggressive poaching Pac-12 schools. I'm not so sure that I would describe any discussions between the Big 12 and the Pac-12 schools as serious or deep discussions. I don't know if I foresee schools hopping around from Pac-12 to Big 12. And if that doesn't happen, then the Pac-12 should remain a 10-team league. I guess they could add a couple if they wanted to, but again, do they add value? So, yeah, I mean, I think they're stabilized. However, two things could change all of this. Obviously, the Big 12 could take a few Pac-12 schools, number one. And number two, Notre Dame could decide to join the Big Ten. It's just a possibility, certainly. And Notre Dame's kind of the one everybody's watching right now. And that would be the Big Ten's at 17, and nobody stays at an odd number, right? So you'd add one more, and Washington and Oregon are certainly attractive options. And if Washington or Oregon or both do end up leaving, that would be pretty significant to the future of the Pac-12. It might end it.
Ross Dellenger of Sports Illustrated joining us right now. Ross, a lot of people over these last few days, us included, have talked about if the SEC were to expand, North Carolina makes sense because of brand and location and all that. But as you've pointed out, that grant of rights thing in the ACC, they're locked into a long contract, 14 years remaining on it, I believe. So when people are talking about ACC schools on the move, is that realistic at all? Is there a way that, say, North Carolina or Virginia, if they wanted to, could get out of that? And what would that look like if they could?
Yeah, I don't really think it is realistic. It's just like Texas and Oklahoma. They're in a grant of rights, and they're there until there's some kind of agreement that has to be made concession by the Big 12 to let them out early. But they're there until at least through the 2024 football season, because of grant of rights. And it's the same thing with these ACC teams. They are there until there's probably some concession made, and if they try to leave and not pay, there will be lawsuits, and many would say they'll probably lose those lawsuits. And the price to get out early is, it's steep. It's nine figures, probably $100 million plus for each team to get out early. Now that decreases as the years go, but it's got 14 years left on the deal. So they're kind of locked in. They're kind of stuck, many people might say. And that means that there probably isn't going to be any movement. But there's a couple of ways they might be able to get out. I think if enough ACC teams say goodbye, then this league breaks apart and there's no grant of rights, right? Or if Notre Dame, which is a member of the ACC and everything except football, breaks that agreement with the ACC, does that let ACC teams out? I don't know. That's a question probably for an attorney who's breezed over those documents. But it's not easy to get out. It's definitely complicated and would be expensive.
Ross, when you talk to people, when you talk to your sources in the Pac-12 and in the ACC, is there some buyer's regret now on not just go ahead and expanding the playoff? Because it does feel, and I think you've mentioned that before in some of your articles, that if that decision had come to fruition, none of this is happening as we speak.
Well, and I don't know if it's none of it is happening. I don't know. It always felt like we were kind of headed toward this end where you had two mega conferences and 30 or 40 teams that separate themselves based on, again, TV revenue and financial resources. Certainly the uncertainty of the CFP beyond 2025, because there's no agreement beyond that, the uncertainty of that is a driving factor potentially in some of this. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Does UCLA and USC, do they move to the Big Ten if they're guaranteed a playoff spot in the college football playoff? Part of me thinks they still do because of money. But they certainly have that opportunity out there if there was some agreement made. It does change some things. And also, I think it impacts Notre Dame more than anybody. Notre Dame's not in a conference, as we all know. So, they are they're kind of at the mercy of whatever playoff structure is created or formed. And so it might behoove them to potentially get in a league, seeing that we have these two conferences that have swelled with power and money and are just kind of overtaking everybody else. So it might behoove Notre Dame to get in one of those two conferences, right? And the ideal location is the Big Ten, because they don't know the playoff structure is uncertain. So the uncertainty around CFP certainly is a factor in some of this, no doubt.
Ross, got about 30 seconds left, so a quick answer, unfortunately short on time. Would Notre Dame consider joining the SEC? Is that a thing that could possibly happen at all?
I mean, anything could happen. That would be a surprise. That would really be a surprise. If Notre Dame joins any conference aside from the Big Ten or ACC, I think would be surprising for everybody. I wouldn't hold my breath on that happening.
Ross Dellenger, Sports Illustrated. Ross, thank you